I liken it to, a lot of people ask me, why did you do that? And I explained to them, if I was a lawyer, I'd wear a business suit every day, but this was kind of my suit, I guess, for body piercings is the best way I can put it.
All right, Brandon, where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
I was born in Kentucky, and my dad was in the military. There's a lot of instability maybe in my childhood, so I bounced around quite a bit, to be honest, lived a few different places.
What part of Kentucky?
I was born in northeastern Kentucky. From there, my dad was in the Army, like I said, and I went from there up to Ohio with my mom for a few years. And then eventually my dad had custody of me, so I traveled around the Army with him. And then eventually I went to my grandparents' house, and I was raised in northeastern Kentucky back there for a good while until my early teenage years, and they moved down towards Louisville, Kentucky, Elizabethtown area, and I finished my childhood there.
How would you describe your childhood in general?
Confusing, maybe would be the best way to put it. Just a lot of instability, like I said, and it's a good way to put it.
No rough spots.
For sure. There was a lot of maybe feeling unwanted would be a good way to say it. And I wouldn't say unloved. I think everybody loved us and they did the best they could for what they had. But definitely unwanted at times, and definitely didn't feel heard, I would say, as well. There's a lot of confusion. That's the best way I could put it. Bouncing from place to place, and they all had their different flaws. I could say that. My mom lost custody of us to my dad, and
why is that?
It's a long story, but in my eyes, looking back as an adult now, I know that a lot of things were twisted out of proportion. It was painted a picture of abuse, and I don't remember most of that. I'll just say that. But I do remember that time a lot in my life, and that's what's a little confusing for me. I know my grandparents spent essentially their life savings to help my father get custody of us, and my dad was in the military as a single father, and that has its own challenges as well. And just I don't go too much into his personal life, but he got into a little bit of trouble in the military, and we were sent back to my grandparents from Germany. We were living in Germany at the time, and they got emergency temporary custody of us, and that turned into full-time custody, and lived with my grandparents for about, the last of my life, I guess I was 8, so another 8 years or so. I moved out when I was 16.
How far did you go in school?
17. I graduated high school and joined the U.S. Coast Guard after that. I thought the military would bring some stability, and it did to a degree, but it didn't really change the feelings inside so much, and it definitely wasn't for me either, I would say.
What did you want to do with your life?
As a child, I thought I wanted to be a cop for a long time, which is kind of funny looking back now, but it's definitely what I had in mind as a teenager, was to be a police officer. And I joined the Coast Guard and got to see law enforcement firsthand, and realized really quickly that it's not something I wanted to do. And a couple years into my military career, I got introduced to the tattoo and piercing industry and started pursuing being a body piercer. And it's kind of been me ever since, is body piercing. Like I said, I never felt in control as a child, and something that really spoke to me was the fact that I could be in control of my own body. That I made some rash decisions, some young decisions, things that maybe not the most visible things you see on my body, but there's definitely some decisions I made about my body and made changes to my body that I definitely maybe should have thought longer about before doing.
Which ones do you regret?
I have one specifically that I regret, and
it's not visible right now?
It is not. No, I have it on my chest. I have a scarification piece across my chest, and I'm kind of embarrassed to even say it, but I have "I am God" carved into my chest, cut into my chest, and I can tell you it didn't come from a place of ego by any means. It was just a rebellion against God. Part of my childhood with my grandparents was very conservative, and just that wasn't the how do I word it? The way God was painted to me as a child and the way I learned about God as a child was not anything that I wanted a part of. I was painted a picture of this impossible standard to live to, and even though nobody around me lived to that standard, for some reason we were held to that standard as kids, and that really bothered me a lot. And it caused me to hate God, caused me to hate the church, hate anything that had to do with that. And So it was more out of rebellion I did that, and it was very immature, I think, at the time. I didn't think about the full consequences of it or anything like that. But at the same time, I haven't covered it because it's kind of a reminder, I guess, of where I was in life. I do plan to cover it for sure eventually, but it's not something I've been ready to do yet. So.
And how old are you now?
39. I'll be 40 in August.
Do you have children?
I do have children, and I'll say I love my children dearly. There's definitely been some turmoil and some separation there, and I'll just say it's something I'm working towards, working past, but it's not something I really want to go really in depth into in a public forum like this, I guess is the best way to put it.
Tell me about some of your body work, the piercings, and what do you call the things on your forehead?
So in my forehead, I have they're called subdermal implants, and they're silicone molded stars, very similar to like breast implants, just not quite as deep. It was done at a tattoo shop. A lot of people think that maybe it was done in a medical setting, but it was not. It was done in a piercing room at a tattoo shop by a guy that was a friend of mine at the time. I liken it to, a lot of people ask me, why did you do that? And I explained to them, if I was a lawyer, I'd wear a business suit every day, but this was kind of my suit, I guess, for body piercings is the best way I can put it. I meet people every day that's been pierced, and they usually can't tell me who did it. And for me, I feel like even if they don't remember my name, they know it was the guy with the 3 stars in his head, so it kind of builds some familiarity and some, people will come back. They don't forget usually a lot of times, hopefully coupled with, a good service, of course, but not just the stars, but it kind of just gives a little bit of remembrance, I guess, is for me.
Do you feel misunderstood by most people?
I think everybody does to some degree. That's not something I don't think I've thought about a whole lot, to be honest with you. I've always been able to, for the most part, assimilate into society pretty well. I'm trying to think of a way to put it. I've definitely felt something. I don't know if misunderstood's the way to put it, Maybe it is a good way to put it. Maybe I am a little misunderstood, but I haven't let that bother me much. That's the best way I can put it, but think about that a whole lot. I think maybe more so by maybe people that I loved and people that were in my life more so than anybody. I felt that way. But the general public, I haven't. I think a lot of times people meet, and of course, when you're heavily modified, I meet people that expect a certain type of character or a certain type of behavior. And I know that, at least I feel that I don't, personify that to a lot of people. When I tell people things like my favorite type of music is country music, and that, I don't, it's not something they expect to hear. Or, if I tell them about the fact I go to church, it's not something they expect to hear. There's just like I said, a lot of preconceived notions. I don't know if it'd be misunderstood, but I think that's with anybody, no matter what's different about you, people tend to have their stereotypes that they think of people, and I've never really let that bother me. At least I did for a long time, and I think body modification really gave me that freedom more than anything, to be honest with you. That was something that, like I said, really spoke to me. The fact that I could be 100% in control of my body, that nobody could tell me what I could or couldn't do with it, even if they could control every other aspect of my life. I could control that, and that really gave me some power, I believe, at least internally, and gave me some strength as far as not having to worry so much about what other people think, and being able to be happy with who I was. And it's brought me, maybe to, from the outside, a lot of success in life. But at the same time, some of what maybe a lot of people would look at as the best times of my life, most financially successful, things like that. I was still pretty broken and empty inside. It was just it allowed me to put on a facade for a long time, I feel like, just in the last couple years, really, that I've kind of started to really figure out who I really am, and what my purpose is in life, that type of thing. Whereas for a long time, I think I just lived for my own selfish desires, and I think maybe that's where some of the real affinity for body modification came from too, and just that one to be in control so much was also some selfishness, Even the way I look affects my family to a degree, affects, my children that I brought up earlier. And I don't think I thought about any of that going into it, for sure.
Do you regret doing so much body modification?
I don't think so, no. That's a hard one, because I definitely end up in situations, maybe I go to a school function at my kids. Sometimes I maybe just wish that I didn't have to be, everybody looking at me. I want my kid to be the center of attention of this event or whatever it may be. And I feel like sometimes, I'm going to get that focus from people just because of the way I look, the stares, the comments, and not even negative usually, but just there's times I just would like to be sitting in the background and not be noticed, I guess, would be the only thing that doesn't make me regret them. But there's times I wish I could cover it all up for just a couple hours, I haven't really thought about that before, but I guess that's the best way I could put it, because I like it. I've got that one regret for what I cut in my chest. Most of it I don't regret. It was a part of life. I've got some names tattooed on me, things that, if you know what you know now, maybe I wouldn't have done, but I don't regret them. They were part of who I was at the time, and it's just, I don't have a lot of regret. No, that's for sure. Not about them,
Tell me about some of your tattoos. Like, what's on your neck?
That's a good one too. So my neck says revolt, and that was as I was getting out of the military, and feeling like I had absolutely no control again, being told what I could do, how I could do it, where to be, all that type of stuff. And I literally got that tattoo, I think, within weeks of discharging from the Coast Guard. And I'm not so much of a punk rocker, revolt type of hate the government type of guy, but maybe those were the feelings I had for a short period there when I got that tattoo. But I don't regret it, likewise. I just, I think a lot of the tattoos, I maybe would get something different now. I know better artists now. I know I'm older, I'm more mature, There's things that, of course, you would change, I think. But like I said, I don't regret them. I just, I look at them as painting a place and time in my life is the best way I can put that.
Tell me about the left forearm.
So my left forearm, they call it piercer arm a lot of times. It's just, people think maybe I had horrible stuff here that I covered, and the truth was it was just an aesthetic. I'm still finishing it up, but I did have some things that got covered, but that was just for the design, for the aesthetic. It's a solid black work. Eventually I do plan to do some cutting, scarification over it. It shows up really well over black ink. I think a lot of times, and I think people in any field can kind of attest to this, but your work and your things for yourself go on the back burner. It's like the mechanic whose car is always broken because he doesn't have time to fix it. I feel really unfinished, a lot of my work does, because I'm always working to do other people's projects and finish their work, and that's one of those things. It's been ongoing for a good little while now, and I would love to see it done, but I just haven't made that time. So.
Is a lot of your body work, modification about control? You mentioned that a few times.
The first handful of tattoos I had, I definitely put some meaning behind them, but eventually it was just about the art. I just picked things that I like, and that was really more what it is now than anything, is I find things that look cool, I guess, for lack of a meaning. There's not a lot of deep meaning behind a lot of the things I do. I've got things like my kids' names tattooed on me, and of course those are meaningful. A lot of my body modification work, I would say, definitely has to do with that theme of control and just doing things that maybe I cut my eyebrow off, and I was told by many people I couldn't do that, even in the body modification industry, people told me I would go blind. They told me I would cause ill effects. And after doing what I thought was sufficient research, I decided to go ahead and do that. And I think a lot of it was out of the...
you did what exactly?
Essentially surgically remove my eyebrow. It was cut off with a scalpel.
Both of them or just one?
Just one, just my right side here. It's where there's no hair, just the tattoo above it. I had an idea of what it would look like for sure, and I wanted that. But at the same time, definitely a big portion of that was just because I was told I couldn't do it, I think, is what really drove me over the edge to actually finally accomplish it. It was definitely one of the more painful things I've been through. But hardly nobody notices, to be honest. It's probably one of the most extreme things I've had done to my body. But as I said, most people I come in contact with every day, outside of there was a viral picture that went around with me having on my lip as a mustache, and people, I've been showed that picture so many times, and they don't know it's me, is the best way I can put it. They don't notice that it's my eyebrow, especially when we get to talking body modifications or things like that. The amount of people I've seen that had that maybe saved and they'll show me that picture has kind of been funny to me, because they'll do that and not even know it's me in the picture. I was a lot younger at that time, and my appearance has of course changed. I would say for sure though, a lot of the body modifications I've modified my genitals, I've modified a lot of parts of my body, and it was definitely had 100%, I would say, to do with control, especially those more permanent. Tattoos can be removed, they can be covered. Most of what I've done, with the scalpel or with cutting, it cannot be undone. Outside of maybe camouflaging, like the scar on my chest, it can be tattooed over, but it definitely will always be there. There's no covering a scar really. You can camouflage them, but you can't cover it. So,
what's your favorite tattoo, or what are you proudest of?
It's hard to pick a favorite tattoo.
It's like picking a favorite kid.
I've got a neo-traditional kind of horsefly on my upper thigh that a friend of mine, Jose, did for me. I like it, but it comes back to it's just a really cool design, and he was an amazing artist, so he did a great job on it. Things like my kids' names or that have meaning to me, definitely I very much like those tattoos, and they have a lot of meaning. But as far as just stylistic art, I would say probably that one is my favorite on my thigh. Of that, it's a fly, and he's green, and he's big, and he's got a horse's head, so he's quite literally a horsefly, which I thought was kind of clever and funny as well.
What are you afraid of now at this point in your life? What do you worry about?
A lot. I had a plan of what I was going to say to you, and it's funny because I haven't really went down that path, but as far as worried, I have a lot. One of the biggest ones is I've been successful in my life at times, like I hinted at earlier, maybe said, but being unsuccessful, not acquiring that again, is a big fear in my life. My kids, I don't have the greatest relationship with my kids, and I fear that I may not ever regain that. Those are probably two of my biggest fears, by and large. A lot of people in our industry, end up dying a pauper, for lack of another term, and I don't want to be that person. But more so than that, my kids mean the world to me, and I want to be that perfect dad that everybody wants to be, and I haven't always had that opportunity due to, in large part, to some decisions I've made, but also some things out of my control. And it's one of the most painful things in my life, I could say for sure. It's an ongoing story though, and to be honest, that's why I don't want to get too much into it, just because of legal things, custody things like that. But it's definitely for a long time, I cried every night. That's the best way I can say it. I even, had a miserable marriage, but if I knew what I knew now, I would have never left that marriage. I thought I was doing right by my kids. I thought I could give them a more peaceful, I thought I could. They didn't have a lot of stability either. I felt like I was raising them in the same type of chaos that I was raised in. And I thought about getting away from that, I could provide something better. And it's mainly just caused separation. That's all it's done. So, as chaotic as it was, and is maybe hate-filled as at times as it was, I would go through anything for my kids. And why I didn't see it far enough forward to the foresight to see, how it would end up is a tough thing for me. The time just keeps going by faster. They get older, and I know the feelings I had towards my parents because of not being there, and the decisions they made. And even at a young age, I remember thinking, well, why can't my mom and dad just stay together? For a very short period of my time, they were married, of my childhood. And I remember the good times of that more than I missed the chaos of them fighting and attacking each other and all the abuse that went on between the two of them in that house. All I wanted was for them to be together as a kid, you know, and I just really question why I couldn't see that for my own kids, you know.
Do you feel like the chaos from your childhood is something that was handed down to your adult life and your kids?
You know, it's a hard thing to admit because
just repeating.
For a long time, I told myself I wouldn't be a statistic like that. I wouldn't continue those type of traits, and I worked very hard not to. In a lot of ways, you know, maybe I did overcome some of those things, but that's probably one of the hardest things about all this is to look back, you know, and say, you know, in the grand scheme of things, I have repeated a lot of those things. I have a pretty good relationship with my dad today, but I had a lot of hate for my dad for a very long time. And I'll just say my dad has owned the mistakes he made and apologized to me, and that's why I have a great relationship with him. My mom has mental health issues, is a good way to put it, and she's very narcissistic. And I do talk to my mom, and I don't mean that so much in it, you know, it's mental health. She can't help it, you know. She does have treatment for some of those things, but she'll always be first in her life is the best way I can put that. She has some bipolarness going on. But it makes it hard to have a relationship with her, you know. To be honest, though, I think as a child, my grandparents raised me the most. And my grandpa was a saint, I'll just say that. He passed away a few years back now. But my grandmother, she ruled that house. And I struggle with the idea that she did the best she could. But at the same time, I think most of my hurt comes from where, on the surface, everybody thought, you know, was the best for us. And, you know, it was never physical with my grandma, at least not for me. I can't say the same for my sister, and I don't know what it is. She has kids, and I've heard the stories that, you know, she treated always some kids different than the others, you know. And maybe that's one thing that hurt me for a while too, is I have a lot of aunts and uncles and, you know, my dad and stuff that they knew the type of childhood they had, but everybody allowed us to be living there, you know. And I will say my grandma has mellowed out over the years. She's in her 80s now. And I don't think that me or my sister had it nearly as rough as some of their kids had it. But at the same time, it was not wasn't a comfortable upbringing, I'll just say that. You know, I was aware of a lot of adult things that I shouldn't be aware of. Maybe even blamed for some of those things at times, finances and other things. Definitely was made to feel like an inconvenience in a lot of ways, but it was always covered in this idea of, we love you, that's why you're here, you know, we're doing the best to help you. You can't, your mom and dad don't want you, your mom and dad aren't capable. And, you know, like I said earlier, we got taken from our mom, and my mom had mental health issues, like I said, but there's a lot of brainwashing that went on. I look back over court records as I got older in life, and I seen a lot of these things that me and my sister supposedly said about my mom and the people on her side when we lived with her. And I know to this day that all those things were not true. I remember some of those very events, and they were blown way out of proportion. Maybe they weren't 100% great either, but, you know, I kicked my stepdad at one point, and he kind of kicked me back like, hey, that's what it feels like, but not in a hard way, in a, you know, in a like, hey, don't do that type of way. And it was just literally a tap. But that got, he kicks us, you know, and that was the type of narrative that was painted in court that, you know, that was a big thing, I think, for me and my sister. We never had a say about where we lived, where we could go. And whether anybody realized it at the time, I think the story that we heard in our minds always got painted back to us, you know. We thought it was our fault, we weren't good enough, that this is the reason, you know, we have to live here because they don't want us, like I said, or they ain't capable, they can't get their life together because we don't mean enough for them to get their life together, or whatever, however you could twist it. Maybe it wasn't said outright to us, but it was definitely the way we were pushed to feel. And I talk to my grandma to this day still, but she won't acknowledge. She never has and never will acknowledge anything. I can imagine what she would say to me right here, to hear me say the things I've said right now. She would deny, and I went through a stage, like I said, I hated God, I hated Christianity, and she played a big part in that, a very big part in it, maybe a majority of it, because she's the most active person in her church. She's the most Christian woman you'll ever meet, but her actions don't always show that, and maybe more often than don't, her words don't match her actions. But she's always been respected. She's always been, looked upon highly. Nobody wants to acknowledge it, type of thing, and I think that was a lot of what's hurt the most for me, and what led me to want to take control of my life was this idea that, I couldn't live up to her standards, but I always had to try because she was in control. I never had a say in things. I wasn't allowed to get a driver's license until I moved out of the house there. I never went to a party as growing up, I essentially was a very sheltered life, but at the same time, like I said, I was painted this picture that I had to live up to this standard that nobody around me was, and there's always justification for their shortcomings, but there was no justification for mine or even my sisters, and that's another thing that really hurts me. My grandma took more of a favoritism towards me, and my sister was not treated very well. And as a young kid, I didn't just not really notice that so much. I used it to my advantage at times because I knew I could get out of things, And of course, I was very young, and I don't say that. Me and my sister have handled this and talked about it, and I've apologized to her. But at the same time, we're talking, 9 years old, 10 years old. It wasn't like I was an adult making these decisions but looking back, it's very hurtful to see the things my sister went through, the abuse she went through, maybe sometimes because of me, at least at the hands of my grandmother. And that can be a hard thing. But, I got really low in life is the best way I can put it. I chased money and selfishness for most of my life, especially as I found success in the piercing industry. I opened a lot of tattoo shops and piercing shops. And on the outside, I did everything I thought would make me happy. And my life just spiraled, eventually culminating in a divorce that kind of turned my entire life upside down. And we're pushing 7-8 years now that I've been divorced, and I only feel in the last couple of years that I've started to heal from that, and started to even heal with, for the damage of my past as a child. I was always taught things like, therapy, you're weak, to share your feelings, you're weak, and I think a lot of guys from my era were taught that way as well. It's not okay to cry, it's not okay to really have feelings, and to go to therapy, you're weak, or a psycho, one of the two, things like that was kind of the narrative as I was younger. And I think for a lot of people, it was that way in all the way into the 90s and early 2000s. It's just now becoming, mental health care becoming very normalized here in America. And for me, like I said, I lived a very selfish life. I thought I was the one in control of my destiny. I thought I chose whether I was happy or not. I chose whether I was sad or not. I chose whether I lived or not. And to the point at times, I thought about suicide just because of the fact that the same thing, it was something I could control. I could choose to not live anymore, And fortunately, I did get to that place, though, because that left me, I had to fix things, I didn't have a choice but to wallow in it. It's not something I could just sit and accept. And eventually I met some people that were able to, maybe point me in the right direction. It's funny to me, I went from a place of, hating God to, I definitely wouldn't say I'm the most religious person, the most Christian person, or anything like that. But I definitely have a relationship with God today, and I try to live my life with gratefulness is the best way I can put it. But I had to surrender to something is the only way I could say it, I guess. I had to stop thinking I was in control of everything, and that's really what it came. I went from feeling like I had no control to feeling like I had to control every single thing at all times. And I've had to let that go. Today I don't find my happiness in the same things that I used to find them in, because there really was no happiness. Who am I kidding? I'm still saying that, there was no happiness in those things, it was just hollow. It was only a surface, a facade. And I know that I have everything I need. And I know that as long as I continue to do the right thing, things will get better. I know I'm not perfect. I know that I make mistakes. But I can say even that, I have a relationship with the same God that I hated, the same God I learned about in church. And it gives me some grounding for sure. Like I said, I definitely am not a preacher by any means, or even somebody that really maybe shares that as much as I should, but I have to maybe acknowledge it to some degree, because it's that's the only time my life really started to change, was when I could start to surrender to something and realize that I'm not in control of anything really, let alone everything. And I know that things happen for a reason now. Sometimes it's hard to figure out what that reason is, especially for those things that I really don't like in life and that I struggle with. But I just understand that I don't have to know everything. I don't have to understand everything, and that can give me a lot of peace sometimes. I try not to think about failure too much. It's still in the back of my head at times. You asked me what my biggest fear was, but I find when I dwell on that, life's really depressing. And as long as I can try to make even small progress forward, things get better, as long as I keep that grateful attitude or grateful mindset. And I definitely don't always do that, but I know that when things get really bad, all I have to do to pull myself out of it is to start looking at the good in life and the good in what I have been given. And I've been given a lot. We're here on Skid Row in Los Angeles, there's a lot worse. But for me, I could have easily put myself in the same type of situation that many of these people are in. And at times I wasn't far off, So it's something to be grateful for. I don't have to look at this highest level of what I want to achieve and only find success in that. And that's really what most of I'm almost 40, like I said, and I think for the biggest majority of that was where all my my focus was on. That's where all my goals revolved around. And today I just try to be a good person, and I know that in time I can continue to work through things, and I can take more and more of the pain that I've lived in life and maybe turn it into some sort of purpose, whether it's just for my own good or to help somebody else, But I don't know, that's even weird to say, because I don't really feel like I help people so much. I'm just trying to get my own stuff together, I guess,
Let me ask you one last question, Brandon.
Yeah.
What would you say is the most important lesson you've learned in your life?
No matter how low and how hard things get, there's always a way out. There's always a way up. There's people that love you. There's a creator that created you that loves you, and with gratefulness, you can make it out of anything. I think that would be the most important thing I've learned in life. I think is with gratitude and gratefulness that I can make it out of anything.
All right, Brandon, thank you so much for sharing your
story. No problem. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. When I was designing the first White Underbelly book, I realized that there were so many great portraits that weren't going to make it into that book. They just wouldn't fit. And once I saw how well that first book sold, I knew I'd have to design a second book. This second book is finally ready to ship. Like the first one, this book has a collection of some of the best portraits from White Underbelly, accompanied by a quote from that person's interview. This book features another group of Rebecca portraits, as well as a collection of color images of the Whitaker family, and plenty of others. You can order yours for $125 or $150 for a signed copy at softwhiteunderbelly.org. Again, like the first book, once this book is sold out, I will not be printing more of them. The portraits are what Soft White Underbelly is all about, and these two books contain the best of all that work. Thank you for watching.